There we go. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, RJ. Welcome to this is the 5th episode of RJ's Evolution Hour. And I'd like to once again introduce RJ Downard, author of Evolution Slam Dunk and maintainer of the TIP Troubles in Paradise, the Methodology of Creationism project. It's a regular on movie night here every Friday night. And RJ, howdy.
Howdy, yes indeed. Fighting the fight here as best I can and eating spaghetti in the midst of it, so hopefully that won't be too weird. I see a side window of material up. Were those questions that were sent to you earlier or stuff for today? There's stuff on coal formation and polonium halos and whale hip bones, and someone mentioned punctuated equilibrium on there. I don't know whether that was from last week's show.
That's old stuff. That was the old stuff. That I just happened to have that up. But anyway.
Stump the RJs. And it shouldn't be difficult. There's tons of stuff I don't know.
Indeed. That whole where do flies go in the rain thing. That's Alrighty. Let's see. Let's
and pardoning the fact that I'm not having access at this time around to the direct comments window, but I am able to see the comments window, so at least I can respond to them that way.
Indeed. So, alrighty. Got screen sharing going, so, alright. RJ, can you see you on the screen? In the share?
No, at the moment I just see RJ's Evolution Hour.
Alright, let me fix that up so you can see what's...
I don't need to see me. It's not that big of a deal. Of course, if you want everybody else to see me, you cruel person.
Oh, you're an important guy.
I give geek a bad name.
All right. Let's see. This should do it.
There I am.
There you are, and there is the. There you should.
And children, I don't know. At least I've gotten off of the fact that I'm wearing my glasses, so you get to see the reflection of the screen, and my classical music library behind me. And all that kind of stuff. The fruit of years and years of being insatiably curious, and at that time having a bit of money to be able to indulge it.
Indeed. All right. Oh yeah. The public could always see you, RJ. This was just so you could see the both you and the public chat window.
Oh yeah, there we go. Hello, mortals.
All right. Very good. Well, I do have a few interesting things I picked out of the Discovery Institute for you to respond to, but...
Oh, this is all fun stuff. Casey Luskin, dear old Casey.
Indeed. But prior to that, is there anything you would like to address, or you mentioned you had some ongoing things that you might want to bring up?
Oh, yeah. I hope everybody on Twitter is actively looking at my Twitter jousts with anti-evolutionists. And by all means, show that you're there by hopping in and giving a comment or a retweet or a like on that kind of thing to show that I'm not doing this just in a complete vacuum. But I was actually tackling a couple things simultaneously. There is a fellow preacher, Online Gospel, gives superficial, credulous creationism a bad name. He's kind of an old Earth creationist, but he's got little whiffles of young Earth creationism, and then he tropes intelligent design, all relatively secondarily. And he makes the mistake of trying to talk technical taxa and details with me, and I am afraid I just am waiting for to find the lever to pull the trap door, because I'm usually way ahead of him on this kind of stuff. So he's bringing up turtles and all that, and a bunch of other stuff. And then I also got into, if you're familiar with my website, the videos that I've been doing, I'm occasionally taking pot shots at the little sanctimonious prick, Dinesh D'Souza. Gives sanctimonious pricks a bad name, in my opinion. And he came up on my scope because of his views on the Spanish Inquisition, which he said was not so bad as everybody thought. And his steadfast defense of Donald Trump and his eye-twitching obsessions about Obama and Clinton, and just he's replaying the last decade in his head constantly. Anyway, he would bring up material, and this other person happened to be talking about evolution and eugenics, and I have been probing back on that because I happen to know that subject quite well, and it's a partial truth that gets troped both in young Earth creationist and design circles, that the bitter fruits of Darwinism are Nazism and the death camps and evolutionary atheism in the Soviet Union and all that. And there's a half-truth to it. The Stalin Soviet Union and the PRC and Pol Pot regime are all doctrinal atheists, duh. But they're also not defenders of individual freedom of thought, which is another thing that an awful lot of us atheists, including moi, hold dear. And if you look at the methodology of tyranny in those regimes, they're indistinguishable from the methodology of tyranny in Christian contexts. So was it really any less creepy to be tortured to death by a Nazi or a Soviet Union person than it was to be tortured by a priest during the Spanish Inquisition? I think in either case, you're not going to feel too happy about what the motives are. In the case of how evolution played out, it's relevant that the kind of flat-out Darwinism that gets lambasted today is not the evolutionism of either the Nazis or the Soviet Union. The Nazis didn't like Ernst Haeckel, the arch-Darwinist of his era, because he wasn't an anti-Semite. And the Soviet Union pointedly rejected the neo-Darwinian synthesis, the new genetics that was coming along in the 1930s, and favored this pseudoscience of inherited characteristics under this nitwit named Lysenko, who managed to screw up the entire agricultural system in the Soviet Union and help break them ultimately. He wasn't even bumped out of control of the agricultural system until the 1960s. He stayed on really long after his shelf life. And so it's way too easy stuff. And also on the eugenics issue, he didn't like at all the fact that one of the groups that actually endorses eugenics today is the Occidental Quarterly that's bankrolled by the Regnieris. The Regnieri brother in the Regnieri group that publishes all the intelligent design literature and Dinesh D'Souza's books. they're in that one brother has been pushing eugenics for years, and I called attention to that in tip 1.6 at the tip website, and I cite all the material about all of this stuff. And so, if you want to look at helping to stir the pot of eugenics, it's not evolutionists who gave up the notions a long time ago. See, what they get all screwed up on is the fact that eugenics comes not from evolutionary thinking, it comes from hereditarianism. The notion that animals are related, a given species, and you can be a creationist and be a eugenicist. Tinkle, who was one of the founders of the Institute for Creation Research, was a eugenicist and was talking about the eugenics of deafness in stuff. I cited some of his papers in tip. So you only have to believe that things are related by, and that's true for a created kind just as much as an evolutionary framework. So there was nothing intrinsically Darwinian or evolutionary about eugenics, but there is hereditarianism and the idea that it was a good idea to breed people with the same care that you breed pigeons or cows to get better characteristics. And the horribly fatal problem with that, and this has plagued evolutionists who were eugenicists as well, is they didn't know how inheritance worked. They had at the chromosome level, yeah, but they knew nothing about detailed genes. They knew nothing about DNA. They didn't know about homeobox genes, which were only discovered in the 1990s. So they were running amok without actually having the science. And in the case of the Nazis, they actually were remarkably primitive in their air quotes science that Mengele and the nasty little people were doing. They were thinking that there was some eugenic-y thing that was going to show up in blood. So they were always taking blood samples. They were so far removed from the actual science that was even then going on in the regular scientific community on genetics that it was just claptrap pseudoscience. There was just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So anyway, the issue of this is a legitimate one to discuss, and why eugenics is wrong. My favorite quote here was from good old George Bernard Shaw. The Flibberty Gibbet dancer Isadora Duncan once wanted to marry him. Our children with my beauty and your intelligence. And he says, oh, my dear, it's just as likely it would be the other way around. And that sums up the inherent flaw of eugenics thinking.
Alrighty. Let's see. Would you? Oh, howdy, Chow. Anything else of interest of late, or would you like to take a look at what Discovery Institute has for
Oh,
us.
we might as well dive in on that, because the other stuff, I'll just do a little preface just to show you what I do while I'm Twitter jousting. I'm also doing research. And so what I've been doing for all yesterday was plowing through a mass of cosmology papers in relation to stuff that have been posted at Answers in Genesis and ICR, lambasting the idea that new solar systems are forming and we can see them like in those telescope things. And they didn't even bother citing primary source research. It was just hilariously secondary. And so I worked up a huge pile of technical literature on actual observations of solar systems forming that we can see, and actual planetary systems and all of that. And you can even see that the ones that are in the universe from our readings don't have the kind of elements that you find in later ones, and the later ones actually have the kind of stuff that you can form life forms and stuff out of. So it's a wonderful technical literature, and the creationists might pay attention to it sometime if they could ever get close enough to the data stream. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I'm doing. Essentially, TIP is a press operation that from the time I get up to the time I shed the thing at night, I'm that's in the stream from older material and also keeping up with the newer material. In fact, just this morning I've started processing the latest proceedings of the National Academy of Science papers. And so the idea is in TIP is to have a big that is ahead of your opposition instead of being behind. And instead of having to react to stuff by having to hunt stuff down, you can pick and choose where to attack because you already know the data stream. So that's the kind of thing there. Okay, so we want to attack and go after Casey Luskin. Ooh, I love that. Yeah, this was from 2015. It's just before he left the Discovery Institute to parts unknown. Apparently he's involved with kind of intelligent design, homeschooling things and writing books for them. But what he's up to exactly, I don't know.
All right. Now, do you have that screen up as well, or do you want?
Yes, I do. I can see that. In fact, I'm about problem number 1: no viable mechanism to generate a primordial suit. That's origins or bust. Problem 2: unguided chemical processes cannot explain the origin of the genetic code. That's origins or bust. Problem 3: random mutations cannot generate genetic information required to irreducibly complex structures. That's actually past origins or bust. That's involving endosymbiotic processes and gene duplications and other stuff. And there we're moving past the we don't really know the fiddly bit details part of origins or bust to we can observe this in living systems. And there they really do fall apart spectacularly, in part because they're not the ones doing the work. They're just authority quoting. One of the irreducibly complex systems, of course, in their view, is the flagellum. The only one that actually does work in the field is Scott Minnick. And he's a relatively minor player down at the University of Ohio. Has done perfectly fine technical work on this kind of stuff. But that's about as far as it goes. If you look at all the people working all the fiddly bit details about how complex systems develop at the detailed genetic level and experimental level now increasingly, it ain't them. And so they're just carping from the sideline. Problem number 4: natural selection struggles to fix advantageous traits into populations. Boy, that's a stretch, because you've got a vast literature on how natural selection and artificial selection and neutral drift, positive selection versus negative selection, positive selection being something that's beneficial to you, negative selection is something that isn't, but yet may not be weeded out completely and may end up being helpful in some other context. And so it's a complicated nonlinear dance. And the amount of technical literature here is way bigger than what they pay attention to. If you actually look at what they pull up, they're riffing only off of authority quotes and very tiny selective issues. I make a point in the TIP project of trying to move beyond the gee whiz quotes to actually investigate the technical issues involved. I alluded to a lot of that. I've covered a lot of that in the reptile mammal case, because there you're seeing systems involving in the ear and about the formation of hair are building on deep genetic substrates that didn't pop up overnight and show only the most gradual variations over time that lead to something that, when you look 100 million years down the road, turn out to be something very different in a formation of a new vertebrate class, the mammals. But remember, no anti-evolutionist, least of all Casey Luskin, least of all any of the intelligent design gang, get anywhere near any of that technical literature. I know because I read their stuff, so I know how they don't deal with it. Problem number 5. Oh, abrupt appearance of species in the fossil record does not support Darwinian evolution. This is an old canard. An abrupt appearance is something that dates back to the creationism venue and is still used in there. And when they get down to it, they are more likely to jump in on the Cambrian explosion, where you see the phyla appearing, or at least the ones that we see in the fossil record. And if you have to trawl back 500 million years, rather than looking at the millions of years after that, that's always a sign of a problem. The reptile-mammal transition is, again, a spectacular counterexample to that, because in no sense whatsoever can mammals be thought of as appearing abruptly, poof, in the fossil record without antecedents. That got 100 million years of slow wind-up, even when you take into account that some of the steps involved may have 20 million years in between fossil groups in some cases. And I call attention to that detail in particularly the Woodmarap chapter in Slam Dunk. You still got the fact that the other are very gradual. In other words, how likely is it, or impossible is it, to get from A to slightly different A over a period of 20 million years? Is there any violation of natural branching common descent that would require some miraculous form of speciation to happen to get from there to there? No, if you look at what the fossils actually look like. So that abrupt appearance thing is just bullpucky when it comes to the reptile-mammal transition, and is even not the case for some of the critters that were archetypes in this area. Whale evolution, we have way more on. Bird evolution, although we still don't have much pre-Archaeopteryx, we do have a ton of stuff post-Archaeopteryx. And the killer problem is that nobody, Casey Luskin or anybody else in the anti-evolution biz, what exactly would a non-abrupt appearance look like? How would you identify non-abrupt in the fossil record? What grade of transition would acceptable to them? And they've never, literally never thought about that. I don't know of any counterexample in any of their literature. Okay, on to number 6. Molecular biology has failed to yield a grand tree of life. This is a hidden agenda, origins or bust issue. And it all boils down to the fact that when you move farther back in time past the origins of metazoans into just bacteria and archaebacteria, into prokaryotes before eukaryotes, exchange genetic information, and we can observe them doing it experimentally at a rampant thing. It's called lateral gene transfer or horizontal gene transfer. Both of those little things are used as interchangeable terms. And what it means is that the concept of species and tree becomes foggy because it's no longer a conventional lineage where the only way you get your DNA is because you had mama and papa merge together and generate a variant that you then inherit. Now you got sister and your other sister and your other sister and your other sister trading bits and pieces of information constantly. It means that the normal conventional tree of life metaphor breaks down at that point. It doesn't mean it's not natural branching lineages. It's exactly that and nothing but that. And in all of this falderall over the grand tree of life, Jonathan Wells goes berserk over this in his stuff. He just harumphs all the time on this, and then everybody riffs off of him. It still doesn't make it unnatural. It still doesn't make it designy. And indeed, if you look at the literature on the speciation identification and lateral gene transfer issues in all of that material, it's just natural and methodical and microevolutionary as anything that you can see happening later on when you have sexually reproducing organisms. Yipes, this one is just a head up your ass dumb canard that's as in its own way as silly still apes trope. It's a really weird misrepresentation of taxonomy and systematics. Problem number 7, convergent evolution challenges Darwinism and destroys the logic behind common ancestry. Oh, hell no, it doesn't. This is just absolute nonsense. I alluded to this in relation to Cornelius Hunter and Michael Denton, who go off on convergence issues, and I mentioned that in Evolution Slam Dunk. Convergence is that the idea that why an ichthyosaur looks so much like a dolphin. Why? Because it swims in the water. Circumstances that make that the case. But convergence does not translate into every goddamn little piece of the organism. And you can trace the lineages by all of those things that don't fit in with the convergence. Marsupial, I mentioned the case of the marsupial wolves. Denton made a great big deal, and he still does in his 2016 book, and he really shouldn't do this, about marsupial wolves being virtually identical to the placental wolves. No, they aren't. They got different tooth structures. They've got skull features that are diagnostic. I spotted this right off the bat when I looked at the actual skulls involved. So Denton, non-paleontologist, looks at a side view of a thing, or looks at the skull and says, oh, they look virtually identical. No, they don't. And the taxonomy can easily tell the damn things apart. So the same thing when you have convergent feature, there's some little aspects, a few aspects, side-mounted eyes, and a few other details that pop up in some of the crocodiles that are superficially convergent to some of the things that are happening in the therapsids. But the moment you look at the whole damned animal, you can realize one is an archosaur, the other one is a synapsid. There's just no way you can confuse those two when you look at the whole thing. It's like somebody arguing how lateral gene transfer in design, intermittent windshield wipers on cars, they were laterally transferred by design to various automobiles. They were invented by a guy who worked for Ford, and then Ford stole it from him, and then the Japanese copied it, and everybody else proliferated, and now everybody's got intermittent windshield wipers on their cars. So it's a lot of things, and the poor guy got stiffed an awful lot until he had a court suit. There was a delightful film that was made about it. But you wouldn't argue, because of that feature, that have developed convergently by different designers coming up with the same things, like different ways of making what a steering wheel looks like and different ways of developing a transmission, that they're not all cars, or that they're not very different cars. Fuse a 59 Lincoln from a 59 Cadillac based upon the fact that they all have wheels, and that there's a convergence of the fact that their wheels are round rather than hexagonal. There was a hilarious parody in the old National Lampoon, a parody of the Earth Shoe, if you remember the Earth Shoe, negative heel. And they did the thing, the Earth Tire, where there was a hexagonal wheel, and they talked about how stable this wheel was and how it was much better for your vehicle and all that. And so that brings to mind the Earth Tire. You may be able to find that if you Google it online. But that convergence argument can only work if you pay very little attention to any of the detail and never work out what you would accept as evidence, and never really work out your own systematics of what, if anything, is related to anything else and how you would decide. And if you have a barn door that big, then yeah, you can use this stupid convergence article. And yet more reason for people to buy Slam Dunk so that they can read all the material in on that. Problem number 8, differences between vertebrate embryos contradict the predictions of common ancestry. This is the heckle canard. Holy moly, that's another one where they just keep trotting out. Jonathan Wells made use of this, although it had been circulating in creationist literature beforehand. And it's all about Ernst Haeckel and his argument that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Raise your hand metaphorically if you've heard that one. And it's the idea Haeckel had that the embryonic similarities between vertebrates was recapitulating the adult form of their ancestors, which is just claptrap. And people have rejected that for years. And even the people who would occasionally use Haeckel's pictures in some of their textbooks always made a point of noting that. There was, however, a deeper connection that von Baer had noted way before that, and still holds true. And that is the genetic architectures that we now know, and the developmental biology architectures, the homeobox genes and position patternings and all that, are virtually universal in vertebrates. And that carries over as you move through this thing, which is called the phenotypic stage, which is kind of a narrow window when the organism, the embryo, reconfigures. And there's papers by, I think, Michael Richardson. You'll find a bunch of them in the TIP bibliography on that. He's written extensively on this. He's written extensively on how intelligent designers screw up the argument on this issue. And you can follow that material as well. I got a big stack of material in a box in my basement that's going to be covering this Haeckel matter if and when I live long enough to be able to get around to revising that section of TIP. So yeah, this one is one of those that's just an obsession of secondary citation, where they just repeat the same tropes over and over again. I don't care about Haeckel. We're in the 21st century. We got homeobox genes. The science has moved on. Live with it, okay? Now, problem number 9, neo-Darwinism struggles to explain the biogeographical distribution of many species. Oh, boy, that's Casey Luskin pure and simple. Because if there's one area where biogeography is not a friend, and that is anti-evolutionism. Biogeography, why animals and plants are where they are and not someplace else, is one of the things that led Darwin and Wallace independently to think of evolution. That there are reasons why things are where they are. And when you look at Luskin, he was the primary pusher of this argument, and he would repeat the same arguments over and over again. He tried to argue that there's some tremendous problem with the biogeography of early primates, again, without ever investigating the details of where the continents were, what land masses were available, how far you'd have to go. And there's one hilarious piece that he did, not dissimilar to the time frame. I think it was 2014, 2015, where he was going after the idea that early primate ancestors could have rafted across. And the picture in the front, which is a parody of Titanic, where you've got this giant chimpanzee and a woman chimpanzee standing in the front prow of the Titanic, supposedly rafting their way across the oceans. The problem is he pays no attention to how small those animals were. The early primates, these proto-primates, you could hold them in your hand. They're little itty-bitty critters. That it's ridiculously easy. We know by direct physical observation how little small animals can be put onto stuff that falls off of a tree trunk that falls off during a flood in a river and floats and floats and floats. And because it's a little itty bitty animal, it's able to nibble the bugs that fly up and all that and make its way across a long distance of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles, even longer in some cases. There's dispersal from the mainland down to Cuba and various islands in the Caribbean. There's a technical literature on it. It doesn't happen very often. When you've got millions and 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 millions, oh, lots of millions of years, it only needs to happen occasionally for that to contribute to the oddball differentiation of things. The other area that no anti-evolutionist pays close attention to, least of all Casey Luskin in his biogeography twaddle, are island details. Hawaii is a spectacular case. Why the hell are 70%, 60 or 70% of all the fruit flies on Earth living in Hawaii? Because one of their ancestors made it there, and boy, did they proliferate. And the same is true for the plants. Why is it that even though the Hawaiian Islands are big enough to hold, you could have pigs and other critters of a remarkable size that could have easily been created in situ, but that never happens. Why? Because they're out in the middle of nowhere and they're a little too far for those sorts of forms to make it by accidental migration. Da-da-da. Then some of the other things, if you go farther back into time, some of it comes up because of plate tectonics and the like. And so certain plant species are where they are because their dim and distant ancestors were neighbors back when the Atlantic Ocean didn't exist. And then so stuff in Africa got connected up. And that's where you have to deal with the map of time. You have to deal with the geology. You have to deal with the exact details about how old lineages are and the genetic information. There's a whole bunch of stuff you got to pay attention to. And guess who doesn't pay attention to that? And his cute little arguments. So, biogeography, yuck, yuck, yuck. Problem number 10. Neo-Darwinism has a long history of inaccurate Darwinian predictions about vestigial organs and junk DNA. Oh boy, that vestigial organ thing is an old creationist canard that's been picked up on at the gang at the Discovery Institute, and junk DNA is their hobby horse. And Jonathan Wells has written a whole bloody books on this stuff. He just obsesses on this. It's not that some junk DNA turns out to be useful. Hell, the regular technical literature is chock-a-block of it. They're the ones doing the damn work. It's that not all of it is functional. And it is relevant that when I was able to still have money to buy new books, I did get the Junk DNA book by Jonathan Wells, and it's in my basement. The very first thing, it's not very big. It's only like 150 pages. It's more of a pamphlet on steroids. It's not really a large book. Anyway, I looked up ALU, and anybody who's been following me for a while will instantly remember ALU. It's the ALU retrotransposon pseudogene. 10% of our genome is ALU. It's a cousin to that's found in rodents, and it has a deep ancestor. Our version is the one that ended up in the primate ancestor and has undergone variation ever since. And it has basically a copy me signal. And so it copies and copies and copies and copies and copies and copies to the point of where there's over 1 million copies of it, and increasing with every generation, of which dear old Wells mentions a example of a functional one and cites just a teeny little bit of technical literature. I went into this in Slam Dunk. I got a little section on that where I go into the bits on it. What he doesn't do is explain about all the rest of them. And most of the time, the ALUs, when they have a mutation that kicks them in and they become functional, they cause diseases. So if you're going to attribute the one or two, the few example, particularly up in brain areas, some of the things that the ALU has inveigled itself into the biology of our neural system, causes some problems, like some Alzheimer's things and others, where ALU, I think Alzheimer's or some other neurological malfunctions. But there's a whole slew of them in other areas, and I've got a big collection of technical literature where I've been picking up, oh, ALU causes disease. So if you're going to attribute design, you have to attribute bad design, nasty design, vicious design. What reminds me of the scene from where Napoleon, the incomparable Ian Holm, was playing Napoleon in Time Bandits. See the little Punch and Judy show because I like to see little people hitting other little people. That if ALUs are designed, if all these damn pseudogenes and junk DNA are intentionally designed into the genome, you have a designer that likes to see little people eating other little people. It's kind of creepy and sadistic and pathetic.
Hey RJ, can
really
you see
want to go there?
Can you see the public chat? Para had a question for you.
Oh yes, because I don't see that on the screen because it's all on the material. Yeah.
Para wanted to know if you breathe between paragraphs.
I breathe through my engineered gills.
That
I have, so I don't have to worry about that. I did theater work in that, where you have to be able to rattle on the line. You can't have to stop for breath, and so effectively I breathe through my nose. I've always tended to do that in general, and so in fact I often find it awkward to have to breathe through my mouth. So I can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and breathe simultaneously in just a little intake of air without any problem. Annoying, isn't it? So bonus problem.
Wait, hold off on that one for a second. Hold off on that for a second.
Okay.
If you don't mind, because if you look at the time, we've used up a little over a half hour.
5:35, yeah.
And that it is definitely time for a commercial.
Okay.
Everybody. You all know. You've all seen how much RJ knows and how much work RJ does to collate, sort, and make available all of this information for all of us for free, and has been doing so for a long time. RJ both needs and deserves our assistance. And if you take a look at this little...
I can't do it without you, gang. I can't do it without you.
Well, he could do it without me, but he couldn't do it without you guys.
No, I can't do it without you too. You have been wonderful here. People are seeing me on this screen today because of you.
Well,
so take no lower echelon about how important that is. What I do is a value. What you have been doing here to help me is also a value.
Well, we're all doing what we can, and I know everybody does what they can. But if anybody does have a few extra, $1, $2, $5, whatever, take a look at the screen. This is RJ's Patreon, patreon.com/downwardtip. Please head on over there when time allows. And if you can't, that's all right. Just joining us is helpful as well. Maybe you could introduce others to RJ's efforts, to the TIP website, to his various books and things like that. Anyway, thus endeth the commercial. And thank you all for still being here during that. Yeah, look at that. Nobody kicked off during the commercial. Nice. All right. And let's see. We did have, before we don't want to forget, and there was one scrolling by that caught me as interesting. I'm sure it was just a point in the conversation, but Satan brought up the question of left-handedness, and the question of left-handedness being, and I when I saw that scroll by, I jotted that down. We're going back to that one. So
that's actually a really fascinating subject, because left-handedness occurs occasionally in other than just us. But the issue of what you're basically talking about is hemispherical specialization in the mammal brain. Why does one section begin to dominate one particular element in another? And that came up in part because of the fact that language and a lot of our aesthetic circumstances are bilaterally asymmetrical, that the one side of the brain, the left versus the right and all that kind of stuff. There's a certain amount of crosstalk and complexity on it, and that's actually entirely an ongoing research. There's quite a few papers that have popped up. Let me see if I can drag something up from the Happy World of Photography. Handedness. Let me put that into my search engine here, and searching. Okay. Yeah, there's a paper from 2003 by Michael Corballis on From Mouth to Hand, Gesture, Speech, and the Evolution of Right-Handedness. And then there is another one from just 2015, Metten-Summers et al. Linkage analysis in a Dutch population shows no major gene for left-handedness or atypical language lateralization, the Journal of Neuroscience. And then an even broader one from 2006, Nature Reviews Neuroscience by Tao Sun, Molecular Approaches to Brain Asymmetry and Handedness. I know there's more papers on it than that because it doesn't use the word handedness, but it's one where literally they're just now looking at what exactly is going on in the brain that causes there to be breaks and specializations, and to what extent that does turn into the left-handedness thing. I think the one that men are more likely to be one than the other in comparison to women, and so there's a certain sexual component involved. There's a weird bit about some of the stuff about finger lengths and some of these other weird things that can pop up as correlates of other things. And this all ultimately, I suspect, is related to the concept of pleiotropy, where genes cascading effects way downstream of where they start out. So the thing that we're seeing as left-handedness is just a specialized niche of a long tendril of a series of cross-connecting and interconnecting and duplicating and varied and modifying genes that are generating way more than just that. So I'm sorry I can't be more technical on that because it's still a question mark up in the air on it. It's ongoing.
Indeed. Okay. Yeah, you see why I didn't want to let that one slide by without you having a chance to address it, right?
Yeah, I'm a righty, by the way, and there's been a long-standing prejudice against left-handedness. The word sinister is Latin for left, whereas dexter is right-handed. Rive gauche, the left bank. Gauche is the French word for left-handedness. So lefties have gotten enormous prejudice. And of course, all the different things of pens and scissors and other things that work awkwardly if you're trying to use them left-handed. I was ambidextrous in one way. Typically, I found that people tend to carry their books in the opposite hand that they mainly write with. So most people would carry their stuff in their left hand if they're right-handed, and then would use their right hand to open locker. I'm weird in that I always carried my books in my dominant hand, my right hand, and I learned to open my locker with my left hand. And it's the only thing I could do with my left hand. I didn't write or do anything else with lefty, but yet I would open the lockup with my left hand because I carried everything in my right. So that's presumably a matter of an on-the-fly cognitive mapping that was occurring because there was a selection pressure to be able to get into your locker, I guess. So that.
All right. Oh, actually, you know what? On the same topic, another one from the French. If you're not good at something, what's that? You are maladroit. You're not very right-handed about that.
Yeah, exactly. There's this inherent structure on that, and that sinister aspect, the idea that there was something inherently unnatural about being a lefty. A similar thing pops up in terms of the prejudice against dyslexics. Nelson Rockefeller was dyslexic. There are quite a few ones, and of course, in the other area where you've got epilepsy. That one, you could argue that a great deal of politics and religion have stemmed from that. There's an art of we know Caesar was epileptic. Alexander the Great apparently was an epileptic. But there's a circumstantial argument that St. Paul and Mohammed may have been epileptics. And so some of the little weird experiences that they were doing, which they didn't understand because they didn't understand the neurobiology of it, can lead off to like religious convictions.
Indeed. All right.
La-di-da. Do you want me to finish off the bonus problem with Casey Luskin before we head on?
Well, we can do the bonus problem one, but you'll notice that all of these were. I saw no reason to go into the explanation for 1 through 10 because they were basically very straightforward. But
yeah. So if we got more questions popping up in the window, because I can't see that at the moment, I'm happy to deal with those. And it's left or so.
I have been looking. I did not really see any. If I missed any, please repeat them. If anybody has a question for RJ or wants to play Stump the RJ, by all means, put it up there. And if I don't catch it the first time around,
I'll just regard the bonus problem of Casey, so I will have finished it all. Humans display many behavioral and cognitive abilities that offer no apparent survival advantage. I know because I'm measuring the cognitive literature that anti-evolutionism generally pays almost no attention to cognitive literature. So whatever argument Casey thought he was going to be making on that, it's not going to be based on a hell of a lot of the science material, which moves on way faster than the Discovery Institute.
All right, why don't we follow the link and see if they expand on these behavioral and cognitive abilities.
Let's actually do that. I haven't checked it to see whether or not it's in my bibliography or not.
Here we go. Let's see. RJ, I'm sharing the screen with you. Can you see this, or should I just send you the link for it?
Let me look up. And then I'm going to just see if I can find humans display many. I'll just hunt for that text search because in my bibliography, I always put in it appears in the original material.
All right, and here just for kicks.
Bingo! Casey Luskin, 2014 BI, 24 October posting, access 10/27/2014. So it is in my bibliography. Okay, now we can start looking at the fun and games here. Scroll down to the bottom in the footnotes.
I sent you. I did send you the link.
Okay. Let me.
Because that way you can open it yourself.
And I can open it up directly.
And why don't I switch the?
I'm still waiting for it to show up here.
And I'll switch.
There we go.
I'll switch the screen sharing so you can.
Yeah, bingo.
If you have that open,
I'm loading it now.
All right, I'll switch the screen sharing so you can see the comments.
Because it's in the bibliography.
Here we go. Hold on. Let me. I'll get.
Here I'll be showing you how I go about doing tip material. First of all, it's already in my bibliography, so I won't have to add it there. In fact, I acquired it at the time it came out. Now I'm in the notes. Note a PDF of this article can be downloaded here. Goody. So, number 1, Eugenie Scott, Dallas Morning News, non-science. Carl Giberson, Saving Darwin, non-science. Myth of the Flat Earth, not relevant. Stanley Miller, Science, Amino Acids Under Possible Primitive Earth Conditions, irrelevant. Icons of Evolution, incompetent. David Deemer, First Living Systems, irrelevant. John Cohen, Novel Center Seeks to Add Sparks of Origin to Life, More Origins or Bust, irrelevant. Primordial Oil Slick, Old Material, 1971, irrelevant. Kevin Zealy, Cold Spring Harbor, Earth's Earliest Atmospheres, Origins or Bust material, irrelevant. Vanadium and Peridiotes, Origins or Bust. We're all into Origins or Bust initially. Let me go down here. 15, RNA World, Signature of the Cell, incompetent book, Synthesizing Life. We're all in Origins or Bust, Origins or Bust, Origins or Bust. I'm down into here. Oh, bacterial flagella, that's knocking there. He's talking about Douglas Axe, estimating protein sequences. We're a long way away from his topic at the moment, which is human characteristics, human biology, human genetics. We're way down, older material, 2048, Scott Gilbert, biology. It's all the same quotes he pops up over and over and over and over and over again. Eugene Koonin, 52. Note 52. That one I got to call attention to because that's why I was so amazed that he had this in here. He cites Eugene Koonin, Darwinian Evolution in the Light of Genomics, but I believe he does it only for a blip about mutation rates. That article is in fact a spectacular mother lode of technical information on an enormous number of subjects about the development of multicellularity. And for him to have made the mistake of citing that source is what I call the Dracula rule, where Dracula can't enter the house until you invite him in, but once he's invited in, you can't prevent him. The moment he cited that article on that trivial point It means every time I discuss all of those biological data, I'm going to be able to say, oh, and Casey Luskin could have known about it because he cited the Darwinian Evolution in the Light of Genomics article from Eugene Nucleic Acids Research. And by the way, it's available open access. Anybody can get it if they want to. So as we plow down through these dozens and dozens of notes, you can see he's got a couple hundred notes in there. It's not about the subject that he wants it to be. It's a series of authority quotes and old materials, and he's wandering off into whale origins, which is another a bit, and cites Walter James Ramin, The Biotic Message. That guy's a nitwit from 1983, note 90, and more general secondary notes. Finally, we start getting down to evolution. Jeffrey Schwartz, Sudden Origins. I've got that book, by the way, so I'll be able to cross-check his fact material on there. And more Jeffrey Schwartz, Why Darwin is Wrong in the Tree of Life there. He's on the Tree of the Life again. So he never sticks to one subject very long. All he does is troll little tropes, which he then splices together. And I believe I'd already done a pass-through on this, so virtually every one of the sources that he has cited in here. Fazell Rana, The Cell's Design, he cites that a little bit. And then more into philosophy when he gets to, oh God, but good heavens, what a mass of nothing. So if you thought this would be a really good discussion, how actual human biological systems function and what technical literature relates to their natural origin or design, you actually are going to be 100 miles away from them. And I know that because I actually pay attention to the technical literature on this point. So there will be a two-pronged analysis on this. One will be to discuss the data that never pops up with Luskin. And the other one is to point out how he's tactically using the sources he does cite. Let me get up there on that. So anyway, that's I'll close that off now because every one of those little topics is an example of Casey Luskin at his best. Casey Luskin is the Dwayne Gish of intelligent design. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Nobody in their venue is as much of a detail fiddler where he's citing technical literature in that way. Michael Denton specialized because he's actually doing kind of his own research and operating from a slightly different frame than Luskin. But Luskin definitely has that as his thing. Could we get RJ to share his screen so we know what he's commenting on? Oh, gosh, I haven't reached that stage. I'm sorry, Satan.
Well, let's see. I'll put the...
But if you click on it's all publicly accessible, so you can track that one down as Luskin's little trope there. And believe you me, you'll find those arguments popping up over and over and over again. It won't pop up in just there. You read 90% of the material at the Discovery Institute, and you're getting pieces of that retroped again and again and again, the same material, the same sources. It's a relatively limited range of stuff that pops up in there.
Here's the source for what we're about to talk about. I'll put it in the public chat here. There we go. So y'all can see that. That is it. And yeah, I was just blowing through the text here, and RJ, here's an interesting one that again tends to point more towards evolution as an individual process as opposed to a social or population process. Well, here's what he has to say that I suspect you might want to respond to. All right, let's see. This is again with the humans hardwired for morality, etc., etc., etc. Okay. But were we programmed by unguided evolutionary processes? Natural selection cannot explain extreme acts of human kindness. Regardless of background beliefs, upon finding strangers trapped inside a burning vehicle, people will risk their own lives to help them escape, which is true. People you don't know, burning car, you're there. Doesn't matter what.
Yeah. Now, what did he cite for this?
Oh, this is there. Let's see. The citation for this is. Let me get the 201 over here. 201, he references Jeffrey P. Schloss, Evolutionary Accounts of Altruism, The Problem of Goodness by Design.
Ooh.
But again,
Schloss, S-C-H-L-O-S-S?
Yeah, let's see. S-C-H-L-O-S-S, that is correct. And
Okay, bingo, bingo, bingo.
this is once.
Slosh. Jeffrey. Yeah, he's a guy who writes from the American Scientific Affiliation. And he actually is a neurobiologist. You can't always get you want evolution and true beliefs from behavioral and brain science. It's 2009. That one, let me pull that doodad up again here, and let me get that so I can see it. Close that little puppy off. But sometimes I want to eliminate my windows and that so I don't run the risk of losing contact on the video feed.
Indeed.
Okay, let's bring that one back up and then click. That's I got to see exactly what the context of that is, whether he was intending it as a criticism. The problem is that there is indeed a gigantic literature on the matter of altruism. And there we go, Jeffrey, emerging accounts. Oh, it's in a book. Oh, that's why I wouldn't have had it. Yeah, and way back from 2002. Oh. That's another relevant factor. Why is he citing something that's 12 years old when the guy has done technical work on that very subject more recently than that? Why is he drawing on old material? Why? Because he's Casey Luskin. That's why. That he's not going to bother about. We know so much now that we didn't before. There's direct reciprocity and indirect reciprocity. Direct reciprocity, you scratch my fin, I scratch yours, I help you for that reason, is entirely based on natural biology and doesn't even require a brain. Yeast will do it. The indirect reciprocity, that involves language, your ability to have a reputation. We also have belief systems that we indulge in. The problem is that in making moral choices about who you're supposed to help, we make use of the neurobiology that we inherited from our primate ancestors. And we now know the two brain systems that are involved in making moral decisions, neither one of which are dedicated to this thing. They're part of our natural kit bag, and they compete with each other. One of them is a more abrupt one that runs off of the amygdala and is emotion-based. The other one is more rational and is involved in the frontal cortex and takes a bit longer. And depending on how you frame questions, there's a whole issue of the trolley car problem and other kinds of things, where there's experimental literature, which, by the way, Casey Luskin and anti-evolutionists in general pay zero attention to, that you can actually see the different brain systems and how they're kicking in and in what order. So the idea that natural branching, speciation, and natural evolutionary processes aren't knee-deep in our altruism and our moral judgment making is just bullpucky. He's just too far behind the data to know. We've moved on. Sorry.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's just me, or is the chat on the stream about 5 minutes behind the actual chat? That's very probably true.
We live
in a time world here.
Yes, that's the.
So I hope that gave some insight on the matter and the like.
Indeed, it did. And once again, I'm pretty sure you'll agree that this is the writings here are focused on the individual and not the population. Not understanding how altruism is beneficial to the evolution of a population is beyond blindness and deafness. That is.
Yeah. And again, we have so much on the neurobiology of it. One of the subcategories in my TIP work, let me remind people of what I'm doing in TIP and why can rattle. It's important that I can keep up to where I can buy ink and paper and food and all this other stuff. I'm documenting for the very first time the whole range of anti-evolution science citations. The primary source stuff. That source that he listed was from a secondary book and therefore didn't immediately come into the cull because I wouldn't have access to the original. But all primary source citations I plug in. And the material, so I can see what they've cited and what they haven't. And in fact, let me, I'll just pull up so I can see what I'm doing here. I have my spreadsheet up at the moment. In the citation list, at the moment, I've got okay, in the cognitive psychology, I've got currently 1,314 citations that have been cataloged so far, and there is a whopping 86 of them that have ever been cited, including secondarily so far by anti-evolutionists, young Earth creationists, and intelligent design. So, which means only about 7% of the data stream. And it's not even for its content. And so gradually, as I go through my system, I'm plugging all of these information into these. I've got topics for genetics, biology, speciation, taxonomy, biogeography. See, I got a whole category for that. Paleontology, geology, origin of life, cosmology, physics, human evolution, cognitive psychology, and climate change, every one of which are hot button elements in the anti-evolution biz. And so I got literally a column for the study anti-evolutionist, and another column for the stuff that hasn't, and another column over on the side that is stuff where they've cited it secondarily. So there are some cases. Denise O'Leary, if you know her institute, she's addicted to glib secondary stuff. There will be postings she puts up that will have dozens and dozens of links. And almost all of them are to secondary sources of where there's a newspaper account or a phys.org summary of a technical paper. Well, I look up the original technical paper, and boy, I've learned an awful lot by reading the stuff that she only bounces off of secondhand. And so anyway, overall, as a rough heuristic, I am literally measuring that anti-evolutionists are missing 90% of the data stream. It's a measurement. And I can specifically tell what was going on and who's citing what. That's why I was so gobsmacked when Luskin made the mistake of citing that Koonin paper, because I go, wow, somebody cited the Koonin paper. Oh boy, you're not paying attention to its content. So that shows that if anybody else were doing this, James Dowder, how often do you update and publish tip document? That one is an ongoing material. I typically, I had to put on hiatus because my budget crashed so much that I had to write a couple books to make money. And that resulted in the Slam Dunk book as well. So some of the material, I think most of the ones at the main tip site, I updated in later last year, dating the material in my upstream. But since they're the same posts that were up, I haven't been able to finish off tip 1.7 and 1.8. I've got a pile of paper in front of my desk that it will eventually, if I can get up to speed, finish off the discussion of the intelligent design movement and bring it up to speed. And then there's a whole section on international anti-evolutionism and all that to pull all that material together. And it's just a big chunk of material. I had to stop basically at the Dover case when I went into my financial chunk. It's in terms of the incoming data, I'm constantly updating that part, and I fire on the fly. So those of you who follow me on Twitter will often spot that I'm able to pull a rabbit out of my hat on some technical paper. There was a case of one, she had my book on the reptile mammal transition, and she was talking with a creationist, and they were bringing up endosymbiosis. The evolutionist, cited a brief thing from the University of California, Berkeley. And it was a general discussion of endosymbiosis and the formation of organelles. It didn't have any source citations or anything, and so it was kind of light. But I pointed out, no, we can actually see endosymbiosis in action. And she was thinking stuff involving various bugs and things that have endosymbiotic relationships. And I said, no, I'm literally talking about organelles in the making. And so I cited some technical papers that had popped up on actually observing the endosymbiotic process at that core biological level, the same level that you're seeing occurring with mitochondria and chloroplasts and other ones. So it's literally observational. She didn't know about that, but now she does, because I can pull that out of my source base. And ideally then, if I can keep at it, all of that stuff will be plugged into the descriptive material. But the websites are clunky. I freely admit that. I had to do it all free. I had no ability to do stuff. The HTML site is only one that was done pro bono. Somebody went through all of my PDFs and generated. She missed a couple sections, by the way, and it does at least have an index and a few other stuff. That's the one at tortucan.com. But boy, it needs to be better. I'd like to have video inputs. I'd like to have cross-referencing things, but yipes, I don't have the website. The website is a free hosting from a friend. So you want to talk about somebody who's what I've been able to do on literally no budget and donations? This is it. And
no
I'd like to do a lot,
but a hell of a lot of effort. I would tend to believe.
Yeah, and what is up there already, even though tip 1.7 stops at the Dover case pretty much, there's a hell of a lot of relevant stuff there. I felt I could rest on that for the time being, because my main point how the intelligent design movement never criticizes young Earth creationism. It skips past them constantly. It bypasses them. What I would be doing in future, I would be filleting David Klinghoffer in detail, because he is just a terrible offender in coddling young Earth creationists without ever noticing that they're young Earth creationists. He praises David Capage, who's a flaming young Earth creationist. I call attention to that in Slam Dunk. So Paul, I do mea culpa that I haven't been updating on the current modules are minor details. For example, I add a new source. So Smith to A has to become B because I've added on a new source for that. I've added no new main sections to that, but there's about 3 or 4 full book-length versions of stuff between 3 macroevolutionary episodes and the old tip 6 chapters and all the stuff that's up already. There's a lot of reading there. And you can get caught up with that. Then if I can ever get my budget to the point, I've got thousands of pages of unprinted material that's in pending files that are either a word processor or PDF format that I can't print because I don't have enough money. And that is that once I have a printed hard copy, it would go on my data fields downstairs so that I know what section it belongs to when I get around to it, and I don't lose track of the information. That's all busy work. It's grunt work that I have to do.
Hey, RJ,
so I hope that
RJ, Satan just gave you $2. Take a look at the public feed.
Why a picture of Donald Trump as your avatar? I don't know that I have a picture of Donald Trump as my avatar. That's what you see is me. And,
no, I think
the picture actually.
I think he's asking Satan, isn't he?
My avatar is a picture that my niece took at a restaurant here in Spokane when she treated me to a meal. And some people who have commented that there seemed to be like a little growth coming out of my shoulder. That was somebody that was sitting behind me. And it was the best I could do under all circumstances. And I'm not a vain man, so I don't need to preen to have, I'm not like some people who put an avatar picture of themselves as they were 20 years ago. And then you go, whoa, when you find out what they actually look like. No, this is me. And I don't care what the circumstances. I am what I am, like Popeye.
Indeed. All right, RJ, that's it. We seem to have wrapped up the hour of Evolution Hour. Now, if anybody wants to do after show, we can.
I'm here.
When you talk about whatever, that's fine. We can certainly do that. And I don't know if you saw, Satan just kicked in $2 with the super chat, so that will find its way over to you. So
all it would take would be the crowd. We've got more than enough people. I mean, if I can be annoying, I could say I've got 1,700 people following me on Twitter, but I don't have 1,700 people supporting me on for the tip work. And between me and all the people following the ones following me, easily there's 10s, 20, 30,000 people out in that network frame. And it would only take a small chunk of them to toss in the $5 or the $10. I don't want anybody to stress their finances ever to support tip. But if you got some discretionary things where it's a thing where do you go to see the next installment of that movie this week or next week, or do you maybe forego the latte once or something like that, and you can toss it my way, it will be very gratefully accepted. And you will get a thank you message from me, because every single person who's helped, all 137 of them so far, including Cy, thank you, and Adam and Paul and others in their own ways have supported either on the Patreon or other. You put your money where your mouth is and your efforts where that is, and I am so grateful for that.
Well, then I've told everybody, not only are you in need of assistance, you are deserving of assistance. Look at all the work that you do on a constant basis for free. I'm constantly.
I'm sorry, but I must say, Satan. Yes, I was thinking of Steve.
All right, let's give everybody the commercial one more time, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll stop this stream, and then we'll bring up the after show. Looks like
while that's running, I'll refill my tea.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining RJ once again. And here, you may have seen this before. I'm not entirely sure, but I think you have. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Give me a minute or two to get set up, and I'll bring up the after show for you folk.
Oh,
Thanks, everybody.
yeah.